Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Solve My World podcast, where we say to ourselves, if I want to solve the problems in the world, I first need to solve the problems in my own personal world. Today, we are going to continue our series going through the 5 steps on how to solve the problems in our lives. The steps we've gone through so far, we've gone through mindset, getting our head in the right place so that we can move forward in solving our problems. We talked about holistic context, where we need to find out what our vision for our life is, and how we can use that to guide the decisions we make in which areas of our lives we want to focus on. And then today we're going to talk about the 3rd step, which is looking at the circles of influence. Circles of influence is an idea that I borrowed heavily from the permaculture idea of zones. So in permaculture, which is where we try and follow the rules of nature to design our own landscapes or lives or pretty much anything. It's a design science that we'll talk about more, I'm sure, in future shows. But one of the things that you do in permaculture is you have what's called a zone system. And basically what you do is you have 5 zones, and each zone, if you think of it kind of like a bullseye with you in the middle, each circle going out is the next zone. So you start with the things that are closest to you, and that's your zone 1, and then things a little bit further, zone 2, and then zone 3, zone 4, and zone 5. The idea in permaculture is the things that you need to visit several times a day you want to have in zone 1, things that you want to visit maybe once a day or once every other day in zone 2, and then zone 3 is like once a week or so. Zone 4 is, rarely you need to visit, and then zone 5 you have as the wild. And so that's the zone, basically the idea of zones in permaculture. So with circles of influence, what I'm thinking of is if you apply the zone idea to thinking about the things that you can control in your life. So let's zoom in real quick. Okay, so first you need to start with yourself and then work outward. And you do that by only focusing on what you can influence. There's no benefit on you worrying about things that you have no control over. We talked about this a little bit in the mindset podcast, but you need to make sure that when you're looking at the world around you, that you recognize what things you actually can influence and what things you can't. Because, like I said, if you're sitting there getting worried about, what's going on on the other side of the world, then, there's not anything you can do about it, and you're just wasting your time as you're thinking about that. As opposed to your own personal life, if you're just sitting around being lazy all day, there's a big thing that you can do to change that. You have complete control over that. So that's kind of the idea of the different zones. The things that you can that are things that you can completely control would be the zone 1, and the things that you have absolutely no control over would be, like zone 5 or possibly even further out. There are things that you can learn from, but you don't affect it really at all. So I've broken it down a little bit. So I kind of talked about this one already. But when we're talking about influence, I've broken it down into several different types of influence. So the first one is having a direct influence. So the direct influence are things that you have complete control over. You are the final decision maker. So, for example, anything that has to do with yourself, you are the final decision on what you do at any given moment. And so that is something that you have direct control over. But this also extends to things that you have responsibility over. So whether those are inanimate objects, whether it's plants and animals that you have stewardship over, like for example, my steer that my wife and I are raising, I have direct influence over what the steer does because I have responsibility over it. I have to go out and feed it and water it and make sure that it has everything that it needs. And so I am the final decision maker on anything that steer does because it's something that I'm responsible for. And you can even extend this to other people that you have responsibility over. Now, this doesn't mean that you can necessarily, control people immorally or anything, but the idea I'm talking about is, for example, if you are a boss, if you have employees, if you tell the employee to do something, they're going to do it, unless you don't have good employees. But that's something that you have direct influence over. And so those are things that you can change. Anything that has to do with any of those things, you can change it without asking anyone else. You can just say, I want to change this, and you can do it. And so those are things you have direct influence over. Things you can make happen by yourself. You are the final authority. That's my little definition for direct influence. So now let's move on to cooperative influence. So my little definition for that is you share the final say with someone. So an idea of this is partnerships. So when you have a partner, you both have to come to the decision together. If you decide you want to do something, you need to talk with your partner and make that happen. And so you still have a very good chance of being able to make something change, actually affect the outcome, but you still need to, talk with someone else, work with someone else, so you don't quite have as much power or influence in that area. So the next one is advisory influence. So advisory influence is when you have influence with the decision maker. So whoever the decision maker is who can actually make something happen, you have some sort of a connection with him or her. And so whether you're on some sort of a council that counsels the person that makes the decision, whether it's just a friendship, they ask for your advice and you can give them advice, or it's somehow connected to your network, not necessarily friends, but people that that might ask you for advice about certain things. So those are things where if you're like, I want to get something done, but you don't have the power to do it, if you know someone who does have the power to do it, you can have some influence in that way because you can advise them to do whatever it is that you want to happen. And so again, in this one, you have a little bit less control than in a partnership, but you still have a little bit of an influence. And so you still might be able to, get things done in this direction. Okay, the last one I have for now, I'm calling platform influence. And so this one is when you have a way to share your ideas with the decision maker. So you don't necessarily know who it is that's making the decision, but somehow you can get your message out there. And so that one has really exploded in recent years with things like the internet. Because you can get on the internet, get on social networks, you can have blogs or videos, podcasts, anything like that, and you can get your idea out there so that maybe whoever is making the decision will hear about it, or other people will like your idea, they'll pick it up, and then they'll talk to the decision maker. And kind of going hand in hand with this is the idea of teaching. So if you're some sort of a teacher or mentor type of a role where people trust your ideas and can run with them to share them with other people. And so this one you can see has the least amount of influence of any of the others because you're very separated from the decision maker. And so it's a lot harder to actually make something happen this way than it is, obviously, if you're the one that has to make the decision. So the idea of these different ways to look at your influence, the whole point of this is so that you can think to yourself when you see something that bothers you, that you want to change in the world, that you can think to yourself, what kind of influence can I have on this? Can I make the decision change myself? Am I thinking to myself, oh, I'm not eating as healthy as I'd like? And so that's something where you can say, okay, well, I have direct control over that, so I'm going to do it. Or the next step, if you're like, oh, well, I think maybe my wife and I should go and do service more often. You're going to think, well, okay, so I'm going to need to talk to my wife about that and make that happen. Or if you've got an advisory influence, you might want to get something in your local community changed, maybe a local law or something you want changed, and someone on the city council. You can go and talk to them about it. And so you might have some success doing it that way. Or if it's just something about how the world works that bugs you, you can get on social media and post about it and see if maybe enough people like that idea that something might eventually change. But if it doesn't fall under one of those 4 areas, there really isn't anything you can do about it. And so you need to stop worrying about it so that it doesn't detract from your goals, like we talked about with holistic context last time. Or you need to think to yourself, well, how can I get myself in a position where I can influence that decision? If you want something in your local community to change and you want to be able to influence that, then maybe you go run for local office so that you can get in there and make those you can have more influence on the changes that are made. So I hope that makes sense. Again, the idea of this is making sure that we focus on the things that we can control and forget about the things that we can't control, or at least not let them slow us down as we're trying to solve the problems in our lives, because I can't solve a problem that I have no control over. And so sitting there worrying about it is just going to slow me down from actually getting the things done that I need to. So I hope that makes sense. Next time we're going to talk about the laws of the universe and how to use them to our advantage. So I'll see you next time. And until then, if you have any questions or comments for me, go ahead and post them in the blog comments or in the YouTube video comments. If you have some feedback for me, let me know what you think if I wasn't clear enough. And I will see you next time.